in the first few weeks of lockdown, I was in this park and I was sitting on some grass where the sunlight was hitting, and some young lad walked past, and he apparently hadn't left enough space for him to get past, so he took issue with this. And I told him something like, you need to turn your television off, or something like that. So he immediately called me a moron, which I thought was pretty resonant, because moron was a word that was born of sort of eugenics in the early part of the 20th century. And if you look it up, it sort of emerges about 1910, and they say, and its definition is someone whose mental development has been retarded between the ages of 7 and 12, which was kind of my peak. So this lad was kind of on something. But I was interested in this. So I was looking at the eugenics idea, and apparently it was quite widespread at the time. So you've got people like Alexander Graham Bell, who's on the Eugenics Records Office, and he was one of the board of scientific directors. And you have who's the other for that? John Maynard Keynes in the UK, who's an economist, and he's on the British Eugenics Society. And you also have George Bernard Shaw talking quite openly about how if people can't justify their existence to the estate every couple of years, he'd kill them. And he says, not in any unkind or personal spirit, you understand. So he'd kill them in a kind and impersonal spirit, which is always nice to know. But obviously, he thinks he would be able to justify them. He's setting the standard. The people who make these ideas up think they'd survive their standard setting, but the rest of us, we'd probably be for the chop. But the thing about this interesting about eugenics is that although we're like in 1915, the American Eugenics Society, there's a person called Madison Grant, and he's talking about how sort of sentimental and divine beliefs in the sanctity of human life would get in the way of eugenics objectives. And then later on, a guy called Frederick Osborne, he says we're not going to be able to, after the Second World War, because of what happened during the Second World War, it all got a pretty bad name. So even though there was a eugenics movement in Britain and America and the other Western countries, it had to drop it because they just fought a war against people, and one of the ways that you vilify the others is to say, look how terrible they were. But in America and Britain, we sort of had these ideas and notions ourselves. So older Frederick Osborne, he says we won't be able to achieve our eugenics objectives unless we change the name of it. And so we moved the American Eugenics Society into the offices of the Population Council, and when John D. Rockefeller III dies, he becomes president of the Population Council, which leads us on to today a little bit, in the sense that when you're politicians now, obviously there's no eugenicists anymore. They all evaporated. We still have racist and homophobic people and sexist people, but we don't have any eugenicists. They all disappeared after the Second World War, and now they just tell you that, oh yeah, your carbon footprint's got to be smaller, or your you can't use as much fuel, or we've got to save the planet, or the climate's changing, so we need less of you. And and just I should throw in there as well that it was the Americans and John D. Rockefeller who funded the eugenics that went on in Germany to some extent, because he funded the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, which ended up sterilizing 400,000 people. And sterilization was legal in America, I think, till 1974, after the Buck versus Bell trial, where a young woman was kind of in a show trial to get through this idea that they could legally sterilize people in America. So we come to today, and we fast forward, and all the eugenicists have magically disappeared, and instead of defective germplasm that they used to talk about, they're now talking about asymptomatic spreaders, and they're talking about how we can't be together, and we can't socialize and fraternize and mingle, and and covering masks of little children's faces so they get sort of dislocated from their fellow human beings. And we'd all be really concerned about this if it was a eugenics plan, but obviously it's not a eugenics plan, because these days we only have benign and benevolent governors and politicians and world leaders who want us to propagate. They're not concerned about defective germplasm anymore. They want us to prosper, And, there's no correlation between defective germplasm and asymptomatic spreaders. Everything that's being done at the moment is being done in your interests, and we should be really grateful for that, because we live in a very fortunate age where the people at the top of the tree are really sort of benevolent and kindly, and looking out for our best interests all the time. It's just kind of unfortunately coincidental that all the rules and regulations that they're bringing in on the back of this COVID-19, I won't use the right word here, on the back of their lockdown measures, are ones that would keep eugenicists really, really happy. Strange, huh?